Welcome to this latest Fit for Purpose podcast. We've got a great podcast ahead of us today because it's coming back to the Wise Group and Sean Duffy, the Chief Executive of the Wise Group, who we spoke to last year, and really having a forward look on how that year's gone. But also, I think, looking at some of the really important work that the Wise Group is doing through its commission on breaking down barriers through employment opportunities. Sean, great to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you.
Let's start with that year that's just happened. Obviously, a lot has happened politically, but for the
Yep.
Wise Group, obviously the work that you do has never mattered more. It might be worth just telling people a little bit about what the Wise Group does in the first place. But then, yes, the past year that you've had.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you again, Justine, and it's been a very busy year. I think I reflect on it's always busy at the Wise Group in societies that it's most needful, and that's it's something that's kind of very hard to celebrate when we're busy. It's because society's in a pretty desperate shape. So we're very busy at the moment. We have been for the last year. We continue to focus on our three main areas, which is around about energy services, which is supporting people in fuel poverty, employability and skills, really focusing on those most distanced from the labour market, and supporting people's journey from the justice system across the UK. And all three very topical over the last 12 months. We've supported over 85,000 households, which is an incredible amount of distress, if you like, across those three areas. We've really upped our game in terms of focusing more on data and evidence, and evidence of our impact, and demonstrating the value for money for society in terms of social impact and the work that we do. We've certainly focused more about being more ambitious about the employment journeys of those coming out of the justice system, and trying to really have an impact, a positive impact on that revolving door that we're seeing, and is so topical in the news at the moment. And where we've seen our social impact work really come to evidence in the last year is, recently we've published a few things. Most recently in Scotland, we did a piece of relational mentoring work across 15 months, and we've just demonstrated that we've generated £50 million worth of social impact using Treasury validated evaluatory mechanisms, which is great. And I think given where both governments are just now, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for where are they going to get true impact for the money they're investing in services that support citizens.
And that relational mentoring work, Sean, it's just worth explaining to people how that works, and in a sense, why it's such an important part of what the Wise Group does.
Yeah, well, it's I suppose it's primarily focused around about the kind of well-trodden phrase of place-based support, and it's really important because it brings that into kind of really start focus. It's around about 15 identified needs, because what you can see is that households in distress are all pretty unique. They'll have a mix and match of different variables that are associated with the multifaceted nature of poverty. So what our teams do across the UK is they, in effect, kind of socially diagnose each situation that they find themselves in, supporting households. That can be mental well-being, it can be financial literacy, it can be employability, skills, poverty, disability. There's a number of things, and it actually speaks back to something that we've heard politicians mention in the last few months, is about holistic support. That's what it looks like. It's easy to say, it's difficult to do, and what it's doing is it's filling the gap that's been left by single issue policy thinking. Where previously it was either a trade-off. We would either do approach A or approach B. What we're doing is we're doing what's required on the ground at the time, and that's where we're seeing the significant impact and demonstrable value for money through our services.
And so that now, as you say, has never mattered more, and also the insights from the data that you get on this is really crucially important to government. And I guess, as you said, particularly around the justice system at the moment, and the need for people to be coming out of the justice system sooner than was planned. That level of support never mattering more than it does now, and in a sense that tailored support being really crucial.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And if I look at the level of the volume of work that we've done in this area, and we continue to do in this area. I mean, this year we'll support somewhere around about 12,000 people out of the justice system across the UK. Now that's when you consider that at any one point in time between Scotland and England, you've got between around about 95, 96,000 people incarcerated. That's a significant portion of that in terms of the journey. And what you're doing is you're looking at elements of accommodation, mental health, substance dependency, financial literacy, skills, employment. There are so many different barriers to a sustainable journey from the justice system that have to be supported, addressed, navigated. What we have is we have a set of established systems that are very, very complex to navigate. And if you're at your least well-resourced, which most people leaving the justice system are, then their opportunity to navigate it by themselves is pretty slim. So where we find ourselves now, in particular with early release, that's why it's so important that we support people correctly within the early release programme. Also, we're looking at remand. Remand is a big challenge in the UK. And if you think about remand, we've really got people experiencing all the detrimental effects of the justice system without any support, because you don't get the same level of support on remand as you do if you're there under conviction. So there's a number of I'm going to call them nuances within the justice system that are hugely exacerbate the impact of it on individuals that we're trying to mitigate, let's say, at the moment.
And I think it's probably fair to say I met some of the WISE group employees who work in the justice system, supporting offenders and helping them get prepared for their life when they come out. And I think it's some of the most basic things, even getting a bank account set up, were some of the points that were raised. And I think for MPs who were at that event, it's quite shocking to hear that, in a sense, there is a complexity around helping people get their lives on track, but some of it is actually just very practical support, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in my, it'll be almost 7 years that I've the privilege of doing this job. It's most often the common sense things that present the biggest barriers. And it tends to shock people, Justine, when you outline it to them, because it's almost unbelievable. Getting someone onto universal credit when they're leaving the justice system is difficult because of it's not universally there's not universal access to technology, and you have to do your universal credit application online, and then it's a 3-day waiting list. You don't have a bank account. You don't maybe not have an address to have your bank account again. So there are a number of dependencies there that for you and I are straightforward, but for these people are significant barriers to sustainability. And that's what I mean about the navigation of it. Getting accommodation. You may leave prison with a prescription for, as an example, for methadone, which is a 1-week prescription, but you're going into a doctor's waiting list that's got 5 weeks. There are simple things that when you look at it, the cards are stacked against you in a way. So it's trying to mitigate those and navigate those common sense things. And those are the types of things that we need to take care of before we even approach the subject of building confidence, skills, a route to employment, a route to sustainability.
And so essentially, there's so many practical challenges, but then behind that, and this was the event yesterday that we held in Parliament with WISE, on the commission that we've been running really for the past year, I guess, isn't it, Sean?
Yep.
Breaking down barriers to employment opportunities and starting to bring together. I think in the end, it was something like 100 different stakeholder groups to really sit down across these different areas around skills, around fuel poverty, and if you like, housing, particularly around the justice system, to really start working through what those basic recommendations are that were in the report that was launched yesterday. And I think from my perspective, that work matters because actually what it shows is there are solutions out there, and actually they're not necessarily that complex, but they do really, really matter. But it'd be really good to get your reflections, Sean, on that work, because from my perspective, I think it's come at exactly the right moment for a new government looking at what solutions might be.
Yeah, I think, the breaking down barriers piece of work, I'm hugely proud of. I think, between the Purpose Coalition and the Wise Group and their partners, it's really laid out quite a straightforward, practical roadmap of what the current governments could do to have a material impact in people's lives quite quickly. We're not, in most cases, we're not looking at policy.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at appetite. Which is really interesting, and the breaking down barriers, it's kind of, it speaks to what our mantra is actually, because, you and I have talked before about the single policy approach and where it lacks efficacy now, and we use this word of it needs to be and not or, and to give a practical example, the countries went through a few years of direct cash support provision. And clearly that's not a sustainable approach. And what we're doing through that is, in some ways, Lord Bird said about it's expensive keeping people in poverty. In some ways, what we're doing is we're maintaining people in their current state. We're not changing their state, because we're just we're providing support that's needed, but only soothing the situation. It's not changing the situation. So cash in itself can stabilise a situation. It's the additional support, like relational mentoring, that starts to change the trajectory of that household and the people in that household's lives. So that's why I'm so passionate about this report, because it speaks to the multifaceted nature of poverty and what we need to do collectively to start to address it. And it goes far beyond cash.
And I think that was the message really from yesterday's event. And I think to some extent surprised a number of the MPs who were there, in a sense, the resourcing does matter. But I think one of those key messages was actually this is about how the system works together.
Yeah.
And it's about that, I think what I would call that last mile policy approach, isn't it? It's the fact that you can have all these siloed departments, but it's in practice, the impact it makes is really determined by to what extent you can have that holistic approach with someone in their life that really takes their barriers away, not just an average person's barriers, but the actual barriers that they've got. Because unless you're able to do that, and that's why the relational mentoring is so important, you can have all the projects in the world, but they'll be piecemeal and they won't really make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah. And I think, you've said that before about the last mile, and the last mile is almost always the most difficult. And but it's the most impactful if you get it right. And that's the thing. And where our teams and colleagues across the UK work at their most impactful is in that last mile. And it's when you bring the I suppose the multifaceted nature of the support together, that's when it has the most, because it begins to compound. You get compound impact in. Because as I say, it's not just cash. It's cash and, and that may be cash and employability support. It may be cash and mental health support. It may be cash and both skills support. Fuel poverty. You mentioned the North East earlier on. We've got a huge amount of insight in the North East at the moment. And there's a significant gap in fuel poverty support in the northeast of England. And that is one of the most impactful place-based support mechanisms that you can put in place, because it has got such an impact on households across the UK.
Tell us a little bit about that work in the northeast. How have you structured it? Who are you working with and through? there's, from my sense, a real ecosystem that you've helped to build. But
Yeah.
tell people who are listening to this a little bit more about that.
Well, we're working with the new combined authority, which is great. And really what we're focused on is economically inactive in the North East. It's household poverty and child poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the work that we're doing with the combined authority will generate in excess of £20 million worth of social value for the North East of England. And that's effectively what they've invested in. And I think there's a bit of a terminology here. I keep challenging the I suppose the public sector lexicon and saying it's not spend, it's investment.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it as investment, then you have to look for the return from that investment. Whereas you look at the spend, it's just gone until the next time you have to spend again.
Yeah,
And
also the other impact, as I know from that, is you end up managing it down. If it's a cost,
yes,
then the objective is to get it
yes,
as low as possible. Where if it's an investment, then it is a really different ball game around, well, which gives you the best return. If I've got £1 more, where do I put it? It's
yes.
entirely different discussion around prioritization.
Yeah, and it's incredible how that change in mindset changes the conversations that you have, and then those conversations lead to different approaches. So the very fact that we're talking about economically inactive, the connection between household poverty and child poverty, and to support the mayor's, Kim McGuinness's approach up there in terms of the new child poverty unit, this slots straight in alongside that. There's a real cohesion about the way that the combined authority's thinking in the North East. They're very clear about where they're going to get the best return for their investment. They're very clear about the societal challenges that they're facing, and that's what they're investing in. So, we've got a number of things at play up there. This is, one, I mentioned the economically inactive programme support, but we're also doing work around about the justice system up there in relation to supporting in the major prisons up there, Cleveland, Durham, etc. So we're beginning to bring that all together, And what's interesting is MOJ are doing the justice work through the Growth Prosperity Fund. We're doing that stuff with the combined authority, and we're the glue that's bringing it together and saying, right, okay, these are the same households, these are the same people. So let's make sure we look at them as such. And as I say, one of the biggest gaps that our insight has identified is that there's pretty much a dearth of fuel poverty work in that, and what we'll be doing is we'll be speaking to some of our partners in the Purpose Coalition about how we can maybe plug that gap and take that forward.
And tell us how you got that data. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you've really started to harvest a lot more of the data insights. Where's it coming from? And in a sense, how have you reached that conclusion?
Well, we've got a very wide and deep partner network, and we spend a lot of time talking to our households, talking to our referral partners, interviewing them, gathering the data from them, tracking their journeys, mapping at an identified need level what each household looks like, looking at the geography of them. And then what we effectively do is we have proxies in terms of the social impact and in terms of different movements.
Yep.
And those proxies have been validated by HM Treasury. So we then map the change and circumstances against the proxies, and that starts to give us a social value impact.
Yeah.
What we've done to support that is we're developing a social impact calculator, and we've actually created a social impact accountant, which I know you'll love. So this is determined that we will set the benchmark in relation to evidential work and value for money, and be able to demonstrate it, so that it's about you're then talking about investment, not spend.
Yeah. And what also interests me about this is, as you said, you're the glue in a sense that's pulling this work together. But even on the grants that are funded by the Shared Prosperity Fund through the Mayor's Office, tell us a little bit about how you build that more civil society community ecosystem, because actually I met some of those people who were part of it yesterday, and they really do drive the work on the ground, don't they, alongside you? They
do. And one of the things that we benefit from is, I suppose, I think I refer to it as cultural productivity. And in that there's a discretionary effort around about our colleagues because of the work that they do and because of the impact that they have in the communities that they are connected to. So that place-based approach, it's not people coming in from outside, it's people from inside working inside. And that's hugely powerful. So there's an emotional commitment between, and there's an emotional bond between our colleagues at the combined authority, and then the overall kind of, I suppose, the political infrastructure that surrounds that to do the best for, I suppose, the societal cohorts that we're trying to help. So it's more than a job, and that, I suppose, one of the challenges that it creates for us is we've got to watch our colleagues' well-being because they are so committed to what they're doing, and you'll have seen that yesterday.
And how do you do that? I mean, it was one of the points that came out was just how intense even doing the relational mentoring work can be, just the effort that goes into maintaining those partnerships and being the glue is actually quite significant for you as an organisation. I felt, as someone who's been in government, that often this question of partnership is slightly glossed over as if, it's a bit sort of vague and airy-fairy and, almost it's not valued.
Yeah.
But in my experience, actually being able to work in strategic partnerships is often the difference between success and failure. It's the difference between holistic and piecemeal. And it's the difference between no return and making a difference that really transforms someone's life, actually.
Yeah. You're so right, because, you mentioned relational mentoring at the start, and we made a commitment as an organisation that relational mentoring is more than just a programme. It's an approach. And it's an approach that we adopt with each other, with the people we support, and with the partners we work with. So we make sure that whomever we are engaged with, they get what they need from that engagement. And what that does is it builds strong relationships. It builds strong, authentic relationships where people are aligned behind and towards the same objective. Because what I've seen, certainly in my time, in my experience, both here and in the private sector, is most collaborations fail because of a lack of understanding of what the shared objective is. So you end up with collaborative inertia rather than collaborative advantage. And because of the way that we approach it, because of that equitable way, understanding what each relationship needs, you make sure that each relationship, each engagement has an advantageous outcome as a result of it.
And so there's time and work that you put in to support your relational mentors, but also bringing together some of those community partners so that they can meet one another and I guess share best practice. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I think we'll never be done making our collaborative approach better, because each relationship develops, evolves, needs something more. And I think one of the things that challenges us is to stay on top of, I suppose, the pulse of what the societies that we take care of require. And I think what our partners get from us is they get an insight that they don't necessarily get from reports or surveys. We get, this is real life, on the ground, at scale insight in terms of what does vulnerability really look like. I mean, I think one of the great examples is what we did with the utility companies, where we started showing them what vulnerability truly looked like, what fuel poverty tasted like, sounded like, smelt like, felt like. Not just what the algorithmic or arithmetic calculation of it was. Because once you understand that at its granular level, you can start to understand what you have to do to alleviate it. And that's why, at an arithmetic level, if you only understand it there, then your first answer is cash, when it's most often far, far deeper than that.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the interesting recommendations in the Commission report that came out yesterday, was making energy companies much more responsible for that holistic, for triggering, if you like, that holistic work that a WISE group does, for example, to tackle fuel poverty. And I think you're right that across the Purpose Coalition, there's some huge opportunities really to mobilise the businesses that are part of that are in this same space, that in a sense have those very same people as customers who the Wise Group is really working hard to support. And I think in bringing you all together, it does give literally a Purpose Coalition group the ability to say, well, how are we going to respond to what's in the Commission's report? And I think that is exactly what will happen now, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because, we can't wait on others to do it. And sometimes groups come together and they create outcomes, and then they expect someone else to go and do it. And I think that what we have within our gift is the ability and the motivation to, between us, do some of it under our own steam. And almost, I think if we do it, others will follow. Because I think one of the things that we've certainly seen from the work that we've done is the level of interest you generate, and the gentle and elegant, thought-provoking conversations that you create. What I mentioned, the single issue policy, to multifaceted nature of poverty. We've got to kind of put some substance around about some of the rhetoric that we're hearing around about this now, and that's where that insight that you mentioned comes in. When people say, well, what does place-based support look like? We can actually demonstrate it and show it, and then we can show what the impact of place-based support looks like at a public purse level.
And it can all come together. And I guess my final question, final two questions in a way is, well, the first one is, do you think anyone can, in a sense, get better at being effectively a relational mentor? Because we all have relationships. I was really interested that you said, whoever that relationship is with for Wise, that's how you approach it. Is this kind of holistic approach something that we should be all thinking about? Well, how do I become more of a relational mentor?
I think, this is maybe going to sound a bit prophetic, but yes, because what it really, I suppose there's that kind of well-trodden phrase of, we need to listen to understand more than listen to reply. And one of the basic principles is, you need to hear what's required. In the consumer world, you would never design any product without speaking to your customers.
Yeah, exactly.
That's no different in any walk of life, but yet it seems to be once you take consumerism out of it and you start getting into social policy, it seems to be not the case, or much less the case. Maybe let's say. So certainly the ambition and approach, I know, for all of our relational mentors, is to understand by listening and engaging what each circumstance requires, and using their professional expertise to do that. And in each relationship, I think is similar to that. To engage, you have to listen, and by listening, you get collaborative advantage, not collaborative inertia.
And so if you were giving, so my final question almost is, we met a number of the MPs. Obviously, it's a brand new parliament now, brand new government, 5 years ahead of it. We launched our commission work yesterday. It was great to get so much engagement. If you've got one message almost for that new parliament, maybe that new government, that you think can really help them drive impact on the ground in a positive way, what would it be, Sean? What would you say to them?
You've got a real opportunity to deploy fresh thinking here. I mean, we hear a lot about, understandably, we hear a lot about the fiscal position of the country, and we're hung up on what money's available. And we seem to think we talk about it always requires additional money. We just need to use our money differently. I'm happy to, I know we've got lots of follow-up from our meeting yesterday. I think we had about 25, 30 MPs there. I'm happy to sit down with every and any MP to take them through what this looks like in their constituency. You and I have talked about it before. We have a recognised, validated HM Treasury approach to demonstrating this, we can put together. We need to understand what each area needs, and we're willing and able and motivated to work with MPs and their constituency workers to understand what does your area need, and actually start to design and come up with approaches that will begin to materially move the kind of the social dial in their areas.
So I think if I was paraphrasing that, I would say the message is that the solutions are out there. They need to be tailored. But in the end, we already actually know how to shift the dial. It's just a question of going on what we've already been doing and what a group like the WISE group does. Sean, it's been brilliant having you on the podcast again. Thanks so much for the time. I know, as you say, how busy it is for everyone. And it's brilliant having you part of the Purpose Coalition. I think you bring a really unique insight actually on that last mile to a lot of particularly businesses that are thinking about what their role is, what their responsibility is, but not necessarily always 100% sure on how to deliver on that. And I think being able to draw on that expertise that you bring, that experience as well, I think is really important for almost a wider Britain being able to have the impact it wants, not just a new government that's there. So, Sean, thanks for the time today. I'm looking forward to the next podcast, and also looking forward to, the next steps on the commission too. It was great to get the outcomes launched yesterday. But as you say, a long way to go, but a lot of solutions drawn. So, Sean, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Justine. Lovely to see you again.
Good to see you.